Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Grace with Books. It's Shelby, and today I'm going to be discussing my least favorite books of 2020. I read a lot of books in 2020, so obviously I couldn't enjoy all of them, so I'm going to be giving you guys 8 books that just really rubbed me the wrong way. I want to preface this video by saying that all of these thoughts and opinions are my own. Just because I don't enjoy a book doesn't mean that you shouldn't enjoy it. Everyone comes at stories with their own unique perspective. These are just my own, and if your favorite book of all time is on this list, I don't mean to offend you because everyone approaches books differently, so these are just my opinions. I would also love to know what were your least favorite books of the year. It's something I'm always curious about, so leave your answers in the comments. I've ranked these books in descending order, so we're gonna start with the books that I just didn't enjoy, and then we're gonna go all the way down to my least favorite book of the year. So let's get started. The first book on my list is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. This is kind of like a fantasy story about a girl and her mother who have been on the road their entire lives, seemingly running from something. The main character, Alice's grandmother, has written these dark and mysterious children's fantasy fairy tale stories. It seems like wherever they go, dark and mysterious and weird things are happening to them. So when one day she comes home to find her mother kidnapped, Alice has to go in search of these fairy tale stories to find out what happened to her mother. Even before I picked up this book, I knew that this was a really polarizing book in the book community. A lot of people really enjoyed it, but a lot of people also really hated it. I think the book had some really good moments, but I also think it had some really confusing moments that kind of ruined the whole thing for me. In a way, it kind of reminded me of Middle Game by Seanan McGuire, because you have this element of these children's fairy tale stories coming to life in the real world, but obviously I enjoyed Middle Game a lot more than I enjoyed this one. I think the last portion of the book was an overall mess. It was so confusing. I didn't know what was going on, but in that sense, it was also really predictable. Like, I didn't understand half of the time where the characters were or what they were saying or the entire magic system of the book, but I guessed the ending, and that kind of was just a big letdown for me. I think that this book could have been so many things and it just wasn't, so I was just really upset with it. I think if the author took more time to focus and refine the fantasy elements, this could have been a lot better. I just think it needed more work. The next book on my list is actually a sequel to a duology that I really enjoyed the first book of, but really disliked this one, and that would be Evermore by Sarah Holland. The first book in this series is called Everless, and it's about this kingdom where they use time as currency. So the rich tend to live forever and the poor sell off years of their lives to make ends meet. I really enjoyed the first book in this series. I thought it was unique. I thought the plot was interesting. However, in comparison, I feel like Evermore was a big letdown. I felt like there were no real action moments within this book. It was not a thrilling conclusion to this series. The main character did a lot of running. She did a lot of looking into her mysterious past, but after a while that got really repetitive and really boring. It was just missing action, and honestly, it was missing a spark of creativity. I'm really upset that this series that I had a lot of hope for in the beginning just ended so poorly, and it's kind of tainted for me now. So I was just really upset with the overall writing and direction of this book. So the next 2 books are actually a duology by the same author. Maybe Sarah Holland just isn't for me. That's kind of what I'm getting from this, because the next 2 books I want to discuss are her Havenfall series. So that is Havenfall and Phoenix Flame. Phoenix Flame isn't actually out yet. It is coming out, I believe, in March. I got an arc of the book from NetGalley, and honestly, I just didn't enjoy either of these books. I did give Havenfall 3 stars. I felt like it had more redeeming qualities, but Phoenix Flame I gave 2. So let's first discuss Havenfall. I really enjoyed the overall setting and mythology of Havenfall. Basically, it's this inn at the intersection between worlds, so the Havenfall is like the gateway to a bunch of different dimensions where the people from these different worlds can come in, mingle, create treaties, and every year they have a big summer convention where they all come in to discuss politics. So that was really interesting for me, that this concept of a place between worlds. The atmosphere and the setting were just so incredibly magical, so I wish the plot had made more sense. There were just a lot of things going on throughout this book, and I think it would have benefited from the author focusing on fewer things and really just once again refining the few elements that she had. As for the shocking twists and turns, there really weren't any. Everything was easily guessable, and there was just no good surprises in this book. Everything went basically as I thought it would. So it was just like not a great read. Once again, the setting I did really enjoy, which is the only reason I gave it 3 stars, because at least it had that creativity. On the other hand, Phoenix Flame, which is the second and final book in that duology, I gave 2 stars. I really didn't enjoy this book. At first, I was pretty hopeful. It seemed to be getting off to a good start, but I think I must have jinxed it because it immediately went to shit. The plot was so generic and rushed, the characters were even more underdeveloped, and the ending did not create a sense of peace that usually comes with the end of a series. There were just so many characters and questions left up in the air. I think this book had a lot of potential had everything interesting not been rushed through, and like don't even get me started with the lack of romantic chemistry between our main character and her love interest. And I'm also pretty sure Sarah just put in a love triangle to put in a love triangle, and that really irritated me. Don't just use tropes willy-nilly to add what you think will be interesting to the book. It was so underdeveloped, it was so out of place, and it was just overall bad. And as I've discussed before on this channel, I hate the love triangle trope, so it was just all around bad. If I had to use one word to describe Phoenix Flame, I would say unfinished. Maybe it will go through more edits before it is published, and maybe I will see then if any of the things I had problems with have changed, but unless I hear that from you guys or from Goodreads, I probably will not be rereading this series ever, and it'll probably just stay bad in my eyes. Alright, that got ranty. The next book on this list is 8 Will Fall by Sarah Harrion. This was the, I believe, January Fairy Loot book. I had never heard of this book before I got it in my box, and while I think the plot of this book was inventive and interesting, I just don't think it was good for me. Basically, this tells the story about a society where magic is illegal and people with magic are sent down into these caves to try to demolish one of the kingdom's villains. They send 8 teenagers down into these mines to face all kinds of dangers and to stop this evil from rising again. This is a standalone, so it had to wrap up in one book, and overall I think that the plot and the magic systems were interesting. I just didn't find myself caring about the characters or the stakes at all. I thought it was good writing. I thought that Sarah Harrion did a good job developing the novel, but I just really couldn't bring myself to care about any of it. I don't know why, but these characters just did not speak to me, and that just made the whole book kind of a drag. I think if she had taken more time in this book to maybe get us to feel something for these characters, or even made this book a duology so you have more room to develop these plots and these characters and this setting, it could have been a really great series. But since it's just one book and it's pretty quick, it's not that big a book, all just felt kind of rushed and kind of sloppy to me. As I said before, I think the writing is fine. I just really couldn't get into it, and that just brought the entire book down for me. So I just like didn't enjoy this. It felt kind of like a chore to read, which is why it's low on my list. It just wasn't for me. Alright, you guys, we are down to the final 3 books. The next book is Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. This year I got really into contemporary new adult romances. I read so many, and I saw this book and it looked really interesting, so I decided to pick it up, and I hated it. I just literally picked it up because I thought it was going to be a fun summer romance, but it was just such a cliche example of so many romance tropes. I thought the characters and the dialogue were just unbelievable. Tessa Bailey didn't sell me on the attraction between our 2 main characters at all, and I don't think the author painted our main character Georgette in a very flattering light. At its core, this book is just about a girl pining over her brother's best friend, which is a trope we have seen so many times before, and this just didn't do do it in a new and exciting way. There's just absolutely no substance to this plot. There is nothing interesting or romantic about it. Honestly, I felt like the main character was also infantilized so much. I just really cringed throughout this entire read, and I just really disliked it. This might be the only romance contemporary book that I read this year that I truly hated. So I just really didn't enjoy this. The second to last book on my list is Wicked As You Wish by Rin Chupeco. This also came in a fairy loot box. I'm not sure which one, but I think this was provided to us as an ARC, so it hadn't been released when we first read it. I gave this book 1 star. This is kind of like an alternative history where fairy tales are real. So it's like everything in the past like 200 years has basically happened, but with the addition of magic and fairy tales. I had a lot of high hopes for it. I thought an alternative fairy tale history would be really interesting, but in the end it was just really confusing and altogether too much. So let's start with the world building. Chupeco kind of just took every known fairy tale and folklore and mushed them together into a book. There was no context, there was no explanation, there were just random fairy tale and folklore characters being dropped like a hat into the story with no rhyme or reason. And the geography of it all just really confused me. Like, I wish that they had provided some kind of map or reference point, because for the life of me I couldn't figure out how all of these different places fit into like one continent. While I do appreciate the fact that the author was trying to send a message about current issues such as immigration policies and refugees, it just wasn't done well, and it was just really on the nose in this book. The fantasy and realistic aspects I don't think meshed well, and I think they could have. I think if they were done right, it could have been a really, really interesting read, but it wasn't. And the social justice aspects just kind of got lost in the mess. There were so many characters being introduced that I lost track of all the names and places. Like, I feel like I should have kept a list, just writing down every time a new character came in, just so I could remember who it was. And then they wouldn't be mentioned until like the last chapter, and it was just, it made my head hurt. I thought the writing was fine. I just really didn't like what was being written about this book. Just kind of gave me a headache while reading and trying to figure out what the F was going on. And it was bad, and I really didn't enjoy it. And I've heard good things about Rin Chupeco's other series. I believe it's The Bone Witch, but I just really disliked Wicked As You Wish so much I don't know if I'm gonna read her other series. The last book on my list, the worst read of the year for me, the most disappointing read of the year for me, was All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace. I want to preface this by saying I know this is going to be an unpopular opinion. I've seen a lot of great reviews for this book, but I just really hated it. And I'm going to explain why. First of all, this was on my most anticipated reads of 2020. I was really looking forward to this book. I thought it had an interesting premise, but from the get-go, everything was done wrong for me. Let's start with the main character, who I had the biggest problem with. Her name is Amora. She is a princess. She has everything her heart could desire. And as much as I love her strong woman archetype, Amora came off more self-absorbed and arrogant to me, and I really just didn't vibe with her. She has this wonderful, beautiful life, and yes, while there might be some secrets and half-truths being thrown around, she still has a pretty good life. And the moment she makes a mistake, it's like the world ends and she has to get out of there, and she flees. And it all seemed kind of bratty to me. I also really hated how she treated the people in her life. For example, in the book, she has an arranged marriage with this guy, her fiance, who actually was a really nice and genuine guy, and she treated him like shit. I couldn't get over how she was just so arrogant and mean to him when he literally had done nothing wrong. I don't know why. I did not like this character, and it kind of ruined the whole book for me. Then there was the cringe-worthy romance with Amora and this pirate. It felt so forced and insta-lovey that I just couldn't get over it. It was just so predictable. I feel like I was reading the same YA fantasy that I have read 100 times. After having read like really similar books to this, like Daughter of the Pirate King and Fable, I have to say this book just falls flat in comparison to those two seafaring books. And honestly, by the end, I was rooting for the bad guys. I was like, the villains are kind of in the right here. They actually kind of are the good guys, I kept thinking. I don't know, like I was rooting for them to win. You know you have a problem when that starts becoming your thinking. Just to wrap up my thoughts for this book, I think that we have seen this kind of seafaring YA fantasy so many times, and I think that this was just all the bad things about those books. It was confusing, it was rushed, it was undeveloped, and I didn't like the characters, which was just the biggest turnoff for me. Because if I can't connect to the people I'm reading about, game over. And I really hated them. And on top of that, this is a book I was actually looking forward to, so that made the disappointment all the more deep. So yes, All the Stars and Teeth was my least favorite book of 2020. And once again, those are all the books that I disliked this year. Please be sure to leave your least favorites down below in the comments. I would love to know what they were. If you guys like this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment, and hit the notification bell to get updates on when I post. I post every single Monday, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!